Hello everyone, this is Shekhar Gulati. Every week I discover new technologies. These technologies could be new technologies or they are already existing technology but I was not aware of them, or some new technology that I read on a newsletter, or some open source project that I discover on a GitHub. So I try to play with these technologies, try to understand, look at this source code, try to look at their code and try to see if I can learn from them. Maybe something that I might need to solve, I might get some ideas around that. This week I discovered a technology or a new open source project called Baserow. Now this is an Airtable alternative. So if you are aware of Airtable, which is something like an online database where multiple people can collaborate, and then they can use it. It's mainly used in business organizations that are not tech savvy, so they don't have their own internal development houses. So they typically use Airtable, which has an Excel-like look and feel. So you can play with it, you can create your tables, then you can define relationship between those tables, and then you can then make them public or collaborate within a group. So I discovered an interesting technology called Baserow. It's an open source project hosted on GitLab. So it is not hosted on GitHub, it is hosted on GitLab. So I thought, let me give it a spin. Let me try it out. Let me see if there's some key ideas that I can learn from. Uh, I I'm active on Twitter and I tweet occasionally on my Twitter handle Shekhar Gulati, and I write on my blog shekhargulati.com. So in case you are interested, you can follow me on Twitter or you can read my blog or follow it. So let's understand what Airtable is, because once you understand Airtable, you will understand what Baserow is all about. So Airtable is a no-code relation database. These days, no-code or low-code solutions are becoming very popular. A lot of organizations which do not have a lot of technical know-how, or they do not have their own technical software development resources, then they try to use something like Airtable or some other no-code technology to build applications faster. So business people can collaborate using these apps and they can build applications very quickly. It is heavily inspired from spreadsheets, so it's very Excel based user interface, and I will show you one example later in this video. And you can create custom spreadsheets, so you are not limited by Excel. You can basically have images in your Excel sheet, in your spreadsheet. You can also have checkboxes. You can have many more things that you can have in a spreadsheet like interface, and that allows you to build some custom forms, some custom sheets that people can use and solve their business process or a business problem. uh, Again, as I talked about, organizations with limited software development resources tend to use these kind of technology. And it's very popular. So if you look at that, so current valuation of Airtable is 5.77 billion. I think just 4 days back they received some 300 million more funding, and it is becoming more and more popular. A lot of organizations are using it, and they are trying to build smaller applications, internal applications on Airtable. So these are the tools that are mainly used for building internal applications. Every organization has a lot of processes that they want to automate. Then they use tools like Airtable to automate that. Earlier, all of these things have been automated using Excel sheet, but again, Excel has a limitation. Typically, you have to share those things by your email. Then people start using Google Sheet, but that does not have a lot of programmability into it. So Airtable is basically is higher than a Google Sheet, so it's basically SaaS service, so it's online, but it also gives you a way to do some programmatic changes as well. So you can define, like, if you have created a record, you want to call some other service, so you can define that using webhooks. Or there's a lot of elements of integration possible in something like Airtable that you will not find possible in Google Sheet or any other public online Excel sheet alternative. So the key features of something like Airtable is that you can link between tables. So that's, if you are coming from a relational background, it's very common for us to figure out that we try to normalize our tables and then we have to have relationship between them. So you can do that. Collaboration is a very important feature of Airtable. So you can, in your organization, you can start sharing sheets. You can start sharing these programmatical Excel sheets or spreadsheets with your colleagues. You can also make them public as well. So it also has a publishing feature, so you can make that public as well. Then you can also create forms. So again, something like Google Forms, but again more interactive in nature. You can do that. And then it also provides this API, so you can integrate both the Airtable in your application, or you can use Airtable as a data storage, and then you can use that in your application using the SDK that they provide. So there are possibilities there. So if you just want to look at the look and feel of the Airtable, so as you can see, this is more like an Excel sheet. So you have names, one column for name, then for pictures you can see that it is more interactive, so you can see images, you can define your ratings. You again have files that you are seeing here, and then some other cuisine, and then some other symbols for the cost part. And you can customize it to a level, and that's what Airtable gives you. Now, Baserow is an open source alternative to Airtable. So as you can see, the market is very big of Airtable, 5.77 billion. A lot of organizations are used to using Excel sheets, so they are the customer of it, and every organization has a lot of processes that they want to automate. And Excel, it has always been the case that Excel becomes the first way that people try to automate things. And when Excel becomes unwieldy and it becomes more and more difficult for people to use Excel, then you try to convert them into web applications. So Baserow or something like Airtable, you can easily convert them into online sheets, and then you can do collaboration. Baserow is built using Django. It's a Python, so it's basically a client-server model. So you have a web application which is written in Vue.js. It uses something called Nuxt.js, which is more like a server-rendered opinionated view framework. So underneath it is Vue.js, but it is more server rendered in nature, and it has a lot of opinions on how to build a web application using Vue.js. Then Django is used for exposing the API. It is Python Django that is being used to talk to the database and expose the API. And then we have PostgreSQL, which is the data store that we have. It also has Redis as well. Redis is mainly used for your caching purpose, as well as for your for communicating with Celery workers. So Celery is also used in this application for some background processing or some other async processing. The interesting aspect of Baserow is that it has a plugin based architecture. So as you can see in this image, a plugin based, so typically you have some form of a core system, which is the base of the application, and any feature that you want to add, you basically write plugins and you can extend the application. As we will see later in this video, the main thing that Baserow can do is that you can define databases, you can define table, and table you can define fields. That is also implemented as a plugin. So it's at the core, it's a plugin based system, a microkernel architecture that you can say, and then you can easily extend it to meet your need. Right now it is very thin, so right now the only plugin that they are releasing is a database plugin, which allows you to create your databases, add tables, add fields. But again, you can create a plugin for forms. And the plugin is also both the web and the backend, so you can expose new APIs, and then you can build your own build front end using Vue.js, and they have their own mechanism. They give the boilerplate to do that, and they give Docker based setup for the application, and that's what you can use to run the Docker to run Baserow on your machine. So just a high level architecture. So this is a quick architecture diagram that I created for Baserow. So you have your web browser on which you will be running your front end, which is Vue.js and Next.js based. Again, it is server, and so a lot of rendering will be done on the server side, and then few resources will be fetched from the static server, which will be hosting your front-end code or static assets. Then you have your backend, which is written in Python and Django. It exposes the REST API, which Vue.js or Next.js uses to do the job. All the data is stored in the PostgreSQL, and there is Redis as well for caching, as well as for the Celery worker. So for asynchronous work that you might have to do, it uses Celery for that. It uses Celery and Redis for that. And then there's something interesting called the MJML, which is a responsive email template format. And to parse or render those templates, you have something called the MJML server, which will be rendering those responsive templates. And I think these responsive templates are primarily used for the emails. So let's just quickly look at the application. So as I said, it is open source, so it is available here on GitLab, Baserow. They talk in the repository talks about how to quickly run the application, and if I just make it font a bit bigger, so you can see that it has a Docker based setup. So they already provide their Docker Compose file, a Docker Compose demo file that you can use to quickly uh, spin up the environment, and I did that on my machine. So if I just show you that, so I'm already running a Docker Compose setup here on my machine. It is as simple as running these two commands: first creating the network, and then that network, all the containers in that will be running in that container. As I think you can look at the damn Docker Compose file also will show you that you have a database which is PostgreSQL, Redis, which is your cache, and for Celery workers communicating with them. And then you have the MJML, a TCP server for rendering those responsive templates. Then you have backend, which is your API server. Then you have web frontend, which is your Vue or the Next.js application. And then we are talking about that we want to use a default network called Baserow demo default. So something which is easy to understand. If you have used Docker, you will know that this is what you do typically with a Docker-based setup. So once you run that, it takes a few minutes because if you don't have those images downloaded locally, then you might have to download them, and then it will take few minutes. And once it is done, you will have your application accessible on localhost 3000. You can start by creating the new user. So again, there is no check of the email, that email has to be correct. So let's just create a new user, and let's just create okay. So once you create that, you will be logged into the application, and then you will see your dashboard. On the dashboard, as you can see that they have already created a group. Because I used my name Shekhar Kulati, so it basically created a group in which group they already have created a database, and they also initiated with that database with a couple of tables. So there's a customer table, there's a project table, and then you can see some data in that. Now what you can do is, if I go to my customer table, you can see that it has the UI is the UI has those elements where you can change the data. So as you can see, I can change the details. So I can say Bill Gates 1 or Bill, and then that data is saved now. I can active this user as well. I can define a new field. So I can say that I have a field called date. Let's just do that. And then I can pick any of those types. So I can say this is my date type. I want to use US format, and I also want to include time as well. Fine. So now, as you can see, as I will do that, I will also start seeing my date picker where I can add the date and I can pick the time. So I can say 1:30, and again, so the UI is based that, so anytime you basically blur out of that, it basically makes a API call. So if I just show you that, so I think if I just go to the network, and let's just do that here, I change the date 9 and I say 2, and as you can see, the network call will be made to basically save the details of that row, and that would be passed. So in this we set field 29, and this is basically the value of it. So now this table has one more field called date. One more interesting thing is you can also they have other types as well. So you can define email type, file type, single select. I think there's also called link to a table as well. And I can say that it is also linked to a table. So I can just say that, which doesn't make sense, customer so you can say that or probably it might make sense that project customer will have projects. So what we can do is we will go to the project and we can say that which customer it is linked to. So let's suppose that the relationship is that customer has multiple projects. So we can, again, let's just say where was that linked to a table, and now we will say it is linked. Where is that? It is linked to the table and it will be linked to the customer. So now the project will have so we can just say customer ID probably, and create it. And now we can choose that this is basically our customer ID here. So now we are linking those two tables together. So this is what it can do. So now you can see that you can start seeing the relationship in both the directions. So you can see from the customer also, you can see the product, and product also, you can see the customer, which is what you can do with that. Then there is, but you can have multiple views for it. Right now, the only view they provide is a grid view that we are seeing, but you can have a different view as well. So like you might want, if the data is such that you want to see the data in a calendar format, so you can create your own view for calendar, and then you will start seeing that. You can sort the data based on some criteria. So you can say sort A to Z. So now it is sorted A to Z. If I want, and I can say Z2, then Tesla comes on the top. You can filter things as well. You can add filter as well. So there are a lot of things they have provided which allows you to search through this Excel-like UI. So again, as you can see, this is more like Excel UI, and you can start making changes, and you can start bringing those data as well. So now this is what, again, you can create another group as well. Now you can add more members to the user as well. So you can invite by people by email, and then you can do that, which I think is kind of obvious. So if we just look at the application now, it doesn't look like it is doing much. But if you think in that way, it could act as a backend. I think backend as a service, or BaaS. I think if you have heard this term, where I think even something like Firebase acts as a backend as a service. So you can use this kind of a tool to define your data format. You can to expose the API, and then you can start using that in your application, because you can use these because everything is exposed as an API. You can get the token from the application. So like if I just show you the documentation of that application, so you can say that for a user you can get that authentication token. So you can make a call and passing the username and the password, and you will get the token. And then you can start using that token to access the data for that. And so that is possible. One interesting thing, if you're looking at this is basically another open source product called Redoc that they are using. So if I just do that Redoc, you will find it's a very good. I also use that in my projects, which for the Swagger based API documentation. So it's a very good tool, so that you can run on your server to expose REST APIs. As a REST API documentation. So it's a good tool that you can use if you want to. So that what the application can do. It doesn't look like it can do much right now, because the only thing that we are able to do right now is you can create tables, you can add fields, but again, you can still start storing it's basically acting as your online database. So you can start at least using in that way. But as you start investing more time on this product, you might be adding more plugins. So you might be adding more functionality to this application using plugins. To understand that, let's just look at the code of this application. So I already checked out the code. So this is basically Baserow right now that I have checked out. It's open in my editor. Let me just open that. So this is the code of the application, and I will just give a quick overview of the code in case you are interested to understand how this system is laid out. So let's just do that. So now everything is collapsed. As you can see, there is a backend folder and there is a web frontend folder. So these are the two main folders that you will be looking at. Then there's a docs directory for all the docs. So they have reasonable docs, so you can learn from that as well. So they have talked about folder structure, how to contribute in the code, and their plugin based system. So they have talked a bit about that, so you can learn from that as well. Then they also specified their deployment scripts that you can use to deploy the application on your machine. The backend is this. Let's first look at the backend, then we will look at the front end code as well. So if you look at the backend, the main folder directory is the source directory. Inside source is a Baserow directory, in which what they have done is the code is laid out in a way that there is something called a core, contrib, and API. So core is the core domain of this application. So they have separated that from their API. So API is what we were seeing when we make any call to the application. So when we do any operation, so let's just say that. So now as you can see, these are basically the API calls that you are making to the application. So this is basically what this API has. So it has applications API, group API, data for the migration. So they have the REST API is exposed in the API folder, But core is where all the domain objects lie. So everything, all the core objects, the handlers that they've defined, how to handle the groups. The advantage here is that tomorrow, if they want to expose some other sort of an API, maybe a GraphQL API, maybe a command line client, they just have to work with this core object, core module, and API is still independent. So you're not making your code tightly coupled with the API. So API is just one consumer of the core module. So they have made the code modular in that way. And they have, again, as you can see, the core module will be what defines all the core objects of the application groups, the registry. So all the plugin based mechanism, they have defined the registry for the plugins, which will be keeping all the plugins that they are writing into maintaining a registry for that, a concept of the user and all that. So anything that is core to the system, they have defined here. And this is what if I go back to the architecture that I was showing here. So when you look at the architecture of the application, so this is the core. So core system, then the plugin components, fine. And this is the core of the application. And then they have also created API is also not considered core in that, and that's what they have created another module for that. Now, all the modules that they have, or all the plugins that they have, is in the contrib module. And here right now we are only seeing one aspect of it, which is one plugin, which is the database. And as you can see, it is having the concept of a table, row, field. Your API, your core does not have that, because core is only having the core domain objects. Then they have the views for it as well. So this is the way they have laid out. And now, similarly, in the web frontend also, they have two modules. One is the core module, again, the same like application groups concept. The second is for the database. And since they are using Next.js has this way of structuring the code. So Next.js gives you that flexibility that you can create multiple modules, and those modules will be rendered according to their route. So this is basically the Next.js is enabling them to do that. And I think Django also has a concept of modules, which is enabling them to use these like a plugin based mechanism. Both the framework, both the Django and the Next.js framework are enabling them to write this plugin based approach. And I think it's a good way to understand like how people implement plugin based systems. Now, another repository another folder that might be interesting in this project is the plugin boilerplate, which you can use to write your own plugins. So they have given a plugin template. As you can see, the plugin also has, every plugin that they have also has two aspects. One is the web front end, the second is the backend source. So, and source also you can do two things. You can expose the API and you can do some other thing like some other module as well. So if you have to tomorrow write a plugin for forms, you will be writing a plugin which will expose the form API, which will register the objects of the form, and then you will be using that to expose that. Then you will have to add something similar on the website as well for exposing the form UI. And this is how you will be, and then you will copy paste when you are deploying. You will be making sure that those modules are accessible, those plugins are accessible, and then that will be available in the application. So one thing that we can learn from this application is how to write plugin based systems. So at least I got interested in that, how they have implemented the plugin based mechanism. This is how I figured that out, that's how they are doing it. And if I just look at the looking at the code of the if I just look at the code of the database plugin, so you will find that this is the database plugin, again database plugin. And when the system when this is discovered, they register their types and all of that with the application. So that's what they are doing and that's how. So you can see that the data that we were seeing. So this is basically the example data that this plugin creates and writes into the database. And what they are also doing is they are using the Django migration API. So Django provides the API to talk to the database, add fields, create table. So they are using that to create tables. So if I just show you that, so this is the handler for table. So when we say, so if I just say create table, I think there is a create table. So as you can see, so there's an object called table on which they are calling the create method to create the table, and underneath they are using the Django model API, the API migration API to create the tables. So it's a good project that you can start looking into if you want to play in the no code space. And I think there is a lot of development that still needs to be done in this project. It's a very young project. It was released this week only. So there's a lot of plugins that could be added, and it could be an interesting project to see how to use how to build a plugin based system and then add those plugins to add more and more features. So that's it for this week. I just wanted to give a quick overview of this tool, and hopefully you find it useful. You might want to try it in your organization and see if it can solve some of your problems. Thanks a lot for your time, as I shared in earlier as well. You can follow me on Twitter, or you can follow my blog at shekhargulati.com. Thanks a lot.